Intro to The Weight of Departure, they thought your silence was weakness. They thought your peace meant defeat. But they didn't understand. Peace is not the absence of emotion. It is the mastery of it. When you walked away, you didn't slam the door. You simply closed it, gently, firmly, and without regret. That quiet moment, that unspoken farewell, carried a strength they could never comprehend. You didn't argue. You didn't prove a point. You simply decided, I will not lose myself trying to convince someone of my worth. And that right there is the essence of Stoicism. It's not about suppressing emotion. It's about transforming it, shaping pain into power, turning heartbreak into understanding. Slavoj Žižek once said that true change happens not when we scream at the world, but when we stop needing its validation. And that's what you did. You left peacefully, not because you didn't care, but because you finally realized that inner peace is louder than any explanation. Now, in the silence that follows your departure, they begin to feel something unfamiliar. Not your absence, but their own emptiness, because they used to feed on your energy, your empathy, your willingness to always try, always forgive, always fix. But when you left, you took with you the invisible glue that held their world together. And now without that anchor, they suffer silently. This, my friend, is not revenge. This is reality returning balance. This is the moment when the Stoic heart becomes untouchable, the philosophy of peaceful leaving. In Zizek's language, peace is not a polite gesture. It's a radical act. It is rebellion against the constant demand to justify your pain. He would tell you that walking away without drama is one of the most revolutionary acts in a world addicted to noise. When you leave peacefully, you are not escaping. You are declaring that you no longer wish to participate in the emotional chaos that others thrive in. You are rejecting manipulation disguised as love. You are saying, I am not a participant in your theater of control. The Stoics, Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, all spoke of this quiet revolution of the soul. They believed that peace was not found in external calm, but in the discipline of the mind. To walk away peacefully is to tell the world, my emotions belong to me. When someone betrays you, mocks your sincerity, or tries to twist your truth, the impulse is to respond, to defend. But Žižek reminds us that sometimes the greatest philosophical statement is withdrawal, the refusal to perform the expected emotional drama. You become the silence that reveals the noise in others, and that silence terrifies them, because suddenly their control no longer works. The person who once reacted now simply breathes. The one who once pleaded now observes. That transformation unsettles them, not because they lost you, but because they see in your calm a mirror of their own chaos. This is why they suffer silently, because they cannot accept that the peace they mocked has now become their punishment. You see, Stoicism doesn't teach us to suppress the heart. It teaches us to hold it gently, to guide it through the storm without letting it drown. To walk away peacefully is not to avoid pain. It is to meet it with open eyes. It is to understand that you can love deeply, lose profoundly, and still remain whole. As Žižek would argue, love itself is not destroyed by separation. It is purified by it. When illusion fades, truth stands naked. And the truth is, some people were only comfortable when you were broken, because it made them feel in control. The day you found peace, you broke that contract. You stopped being their emotional supply. You became free. And that freedom echoes louder than any argument ever could. The silent suffering of those who lost your peace. Now they suffer, not because you left with rage, but because you left with grace. You didn't curse them. You didn't try to destroy them. You simply disappeared into calm, and that calm has become their mirror. You see, when someone loses a person who screamed and argued, they find relief. But when they lose a person who loved gently and left quietly, they find reflection. The peace they once took for granted becomes unbearable in its absence. They start replaying every word, every glance, trying to understand how the one who once gave them warmth now gives them silence. Žižek once noted that absence speaks more brutally than presence. Your silence is now the loudest thing in their life. It forces them to confront the very truth they tried to avoid, that they were the cause of their own emptiness. And yet, you don't celebrate their suffering. That's not the Stoic way. The goal was never to make them regret. The goal was to heal your own heart without revenge. To detach not out of bitterness but out of self-respect. True Stoicism is not emotional indifference, but it's emotional clarity. You see the storm, but you don't become it. You recognize the pain, but you no longer identify with it. As Žižek might frame it, peace is not the denial of suffering. It's the understanding that suffering, too, is part of the human condition. To leave peacefully is to say, I accept that you were part of my story but not my ending. You carry gratitude, not resentment. You carry wisdom, not wounds. And in that serenity there is immense power, because when you reach this stage you don't just rise above others, you rise above your own past self. You no longer chase closure, you become it. Those who hurt you now face the emptiness they once projected onto you. Their silence is not peace, it's punishment. Because silence without understanding is torment. You left with understanding. They remain with confusion. That's the quiet justice of the universe, and not cruel, not loud, but perfectly balanced. So when you think of them, don't think with anger. Think with calm gratitude. They were the lesson that led you to yourself. And you are the proof that peace is the loudest revenge. You left peacefully. Now they suffer silently. And in that balance, life finds its poetry. The rebirth after detachment. When the dust settles after departure, something profound begins. Not in the world outside, but within you. You notice that silence has a rhythm. At first it feels empty. Later it becomes sacred. That emptiness which once frightened you now becomes your teacher. For the first time in a long time you are not reacting. You are observing. Zizek often says that freedom begins where habit ends. When you step out of relationships, routines, and emotional patterns that once defined you, the absence of them feels unbearable, because the self has forgotten how to exist without constant reflection from others. But slowly in that vacuum something emerges. Awareness. You begin to realize that peace was never something you received. It was something you lost while trying to be understood. Every act of explaining yourself, every argument, every desperate attempt to prove your loyalty, it was all a quiet erosion of your soul. Leaving peacefully wasn't just walking away from someone else. It was returning to yourself. The Stoics believed that rebirth is not a dramatic event but a subtle shift. It happens the day you wake up and realize you no longer crave their apology. It happens the moment your mind stops writing imaginary dialogues to justify your worth. That is the moment the real you breathes again. Not the reactive self, not the wounded one, but the calm witness behind it all. You start to see that life does not owe you closure. Žižek would remind us that closure is a fantasy, a desire of the ego to turn pain into a story with an ending. But real life, he says, is not a narrative. It's a field of constant becoming. To demand closure is to deny growth, so you accept the fragments. You stop stitching wounds into words. You let the unfinished remain unfinished. and in doing so you find a peace that is no longer dependent on resolution. This is rebirth. Not a grand moment of light, but the quiet realization that you don't need to be fixed, because you were never truly broken. The paradox of power in stillness. There is a kind of power that comes not from speaking but from pausing. The world glorifies reaction, quick words, fast judgments, emotional displays. But the Stoic knows, the slower the response, the deeper the wisdom. When you choose not to react, people will mistake it for indifference. They will say you've become cold, detached, distant. But Zizek might laugh at this. He would say that true warmth exists only after the fire burns itself out. Meaning, only after emotion loses its need to dominate do you find authentic feeling. You no longer explode to prove you care. You care quietly, intentionally, without performance. You no longer compete for understanding. You create your own peace and invite others to meet you there or not at all. This stillness is not passive. It is powerful. Because in the calm you begin to perceive what chaos hides. You see the patterns of manipulation that once confused you. You recognize the cycles of guilt that kept you returning. And most importantly, you see yourself, not as victim but as participant capable of change. Power in stillness is dangerous to those who depend on your emotional instability. They no longer know how to reach you because their tools, guilt, blame, noise, no longer work. They call it arrogance, but it is simply clarity. You no longer speak their language of control. The paradox of Stoicism is that the softer you become, the stronger you grow. Žižek might frame it this way. To retreat is not to surrender, but to create a new battlefield inside the self. And that battlefield is silence, where every reaction is weighed and every emotion tested. The more you master silence, the less the world can shake you. So when people wonder how you maintain calm while others crumble, understand that it is not pride, it is practice. You have simply learned that storms cannot drown the one who has already made peace with rain. The mirror of suffering and the return of balance eventually. Life has a way of returning balance when not through vengeance but through reflection. Those who once caused pain will confront their own through the mirror of time, not because you wished it, but because that is how existence teaches accountability. When you left peacefully, you removed yourself from their emotional economy. You no longer provided reactions, validation, or conflict, and that absence forced them to face themselves, a confrontation they had avoided for years. Žižek often insists that suffering becomes unbearable only when it is meaningless. And now for them your absence creates precisely that, a suffering without meaning. They cannot explain it away because you didn't fight. They cannot justify it because you didn't curse. You simply left. And that simplicity destroys all their excuses. Meanwhile, your suffering begins to transform. It softens, becomes lighter. You begin to feel compassion, not approval but understanding. You realize they too were acting from fear, from ignorance, from their own lack of inner peace. And in that understanding, resentment dissolves. The Stoics called this the return to logos, the alignment of one's mind with universal reason. Žižek might describe it differently, as the moment ideology breaks and truth stands naked. Either way, it is liberation. Because the moment you stop needing justice, justice begins to appear in silence. Their regret is not your victory. Your peace is. And your calm presence, even in absence, begins to influence others. You become an example. That peace is not weakness, but wisdom. That detachment is not cruelty, but care directed inward first. That the greatest act of love is sometimes to walk away. Not to punish, but to preserve what remains sacred in you. And in that quiet conclusion, life begins to move again. Not in circles, but in clarity. You no longer chase closure. You live it. You no longer seek meaning. You embody it. And those who once misunderstood your silence now realize it was never silence at all, but a language they couldn't yet understand. You left peacefully. Now they suffer silently, but the truth is, and you were never meant to make them suffer. You were meant to remind the world that peace itself can be the loudest form of love. The freedom of emotional detachment. Some point in your journey, you realize that detachment isn't the absence of feeling. It's the purification of it. You still care, but you care differently. You still feel, but your feelings no longer imprison you. Slavoj Žižek often said that true love appears when we accept that we cannot control its object. To love and yet not demand, to feel and yet not cling to him, that is emotional freedom. It is not coldness. It is clarity. It is to look at someone and say, I honor your path even if it no longer walks beside mine. When you leave peacefully, the world expects you to crumble. They wait for signs of weakness and for you to come back, for you to break the silence. But Stoicism teaches us that silence is not the absence of voice. It is the sound of mastery. You speak now through presence, not persuasion. Through composure, not confrontation. Emotional detachment does not make you immune to pain. It makes you intimate with it. You've looked at your wounds and you've stopped running from them. You've realized that pain, when accepted, transforms into wisdom. And that wisdom tells you, not every connection deserves continuation. Some people are not meant to walk with you to peace. They are meant to teach you how to find it. When Zizek speaks of ideology, he reminds us that we live in illusions until something breaks. Your detachment is that break. The moment illusion collapses and you see reality unfiltered. No romanticization, no fantasy, no hope that they'll become what they never were. You stop negotiating with the truth. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. And in that surrender to what is, freedom arises. It is not the kind of freedom the world praises. Loud, rebellious, explosive. It's the quiet kind. The freedom of a person who can sit alone, content, untouched by the chaos they once called love. That is the highest Stoic virtue, to belong wholly to yourself. And in that belonging, your soul becomes still. You don't chase peace anymore. You are peace, transcending pain and becoming the example. There comes a time when your healing stops being about you and starts being about others. Because the world watches how you rise. They remember how you handled betrayal, loss, and disappointment. They notice that you did not turn bitter. You did not seek revenge. You simply evolved. Quietly, deeply, permanently. Žižek would say that every act of transformation is political because it changes the invisible structure of how people relate to one another. When you choose peace in a culture obsessed with reaction, you disrupt that structure. You become the anomaly, the one who refuses to perform pain for validation. Your calm becomes a mirror that exposes everyone else's restlessness. People begin to approach you differently. Some are drawn to your serenity. Others are intimidated by it. Because peace has weight, it commands respect without words. And the ones who once doubted your strength now sense that you have tapped into something they cannot access while clinging to ego. You've transcended pain not by erasing it, but by integrating it. You've stopped asking, why did this happen to me? And started understanding it happened for me. Each wound became an opening for light to enter. Each goodbye became a bridge toward authenticity. You are no longer the person who left. You are the person who understood why you had to. And this understanding radiates. You no longer argue for peace. You embody it. You no longer wish harm upon those who hurt you. You hope they find the silence that healed you. This is transcendence. Not rising above others, but rising beyond the need to compare at all. To live, as the Stoics said, in accordance with nature, which is simply to be at peace with what is. You've learned that life is not about control but alignment, not about revenge but release, not about proving but becoming. And in this becoming, your story transforms from one of suffering into one of guidance. You've become the calm in a world addicted to noise, the stillness that makes others pause and think, the reminder that peace is not given, it is chosen, over and over in the quiet moments when no one is watching. The Stoic legacy of leaving in peace, so here we are, at the end of one chapter and the quiet beginning of another. They still think of you, though they may never say it. They still feel your absence, though they pretend they don't. But that's no longer your concern, Rikiain, because you have become something their chaos cannot touch. You left peacefully, and that peace has now become your signature. You are no longer defined by who hurt you, but by how gracefully you chose to heal. Zizek once wrote that sometimes silence is not withdrawal, but resistance, and that's what your departure truly was. Resistance against losing yourself to noise, argument, and emotional dependency. You didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you started caring correctly, beginning with yourself. The Stoics would tell you, the world does not break a person who has built a home within their own mind. And you have done exactly that. You've built a space inside you where peace lives, not as a guest, but as a permanent resident. Now, when they think of you, they feel two things: regret and respect. Regret for not valuing your calm when they had it. Respect for realizing that they never truly understood what it took for you to stay gentle in a world that tested your patience. And as you walk forward, without resentment, without pride, you carry the quiet strength of one who has conquered the self. Because in the end, that is the only victory worth having. Not victory over others, but victory over your own reactions. Not control over the world, but harmony with your own heart. You left peacefully, and not because you were weak, but because you finally understood strength. You chose silence, and not because you had nothing to say, but because your peace said everything. And now, as life unfolds, you realize that you never truly lost anything. You only lost the need to be understood by those who never tried. So let them wonder. Let them feel the silence you left behind. Because in that silence lies your legacy. Calm, eternal, untouchable. And one day, when they too grow tired of noise, they will remember you. The one who walked away not in anger but in wisdom. You left peacefully. Now they suffer silently. And you live freely.